Hey, it's Webs here, and there's been some balancing changes announced along with a change to Hearthstone Mercenaries. So let's go over them. So if you pay attention to Hearthstone esports, you'll know that the World Championship for Hearthstone was this previous weekend. And that is the reason why we had to wait until this week to actually see any changes to Standard. And I know there are a bunch of people who are tired of all the OTK strategies currently in Standard, which is why they actually have to make some changes here. Though those are some of my favorite style of decks, so I didn't really have too much of an issue. I am glad to see that they're actually making some changes that a lot of people were looking forward to, though. The first change we're seeing is a increased cost to Celestial Alignment. Now, this is not the OTK deck that I actually have the most issue with, and I'm actually kind of sad to actually see this changed. While I don't think this is going to completely kill the card, it will make it go from a tier 1 deck to probably a tier 2 deck, and it is one of those decks that was kind of a counterbalance for some of the other OTK decks that exist currently in Standard, but those are also seeing some changes, so I think they were just trying to make sure this wasn't going to be a tier 0 deck in the future because of those changes. The second nerf we're seeing is to Alliance Bannerman, where they reduced its HP by 1. While I don't think this nerf will kill the card, I do see the reasoning behind it. This card is included in so many Paladin decks it isn't even funny, and with a 1 HP reduction, I don't think this will kill the card, just because of the fact that you're still going to be able to hand buff your entire hand and draw an additional minion out of your deck, thus helping with the consistency factor of Paladin decks. The only way they could have actually killed the card would be to increase the cost by maybe 1 or 2. The only thing this does is make it easier to actually kill when you're snowballing with a secondary copy of it. The third nerf we're seeing is to effective Octobot, which is a card that's actually been dodging nerfs since its release. It's always going to be a problematic card just because it discounts so many cards in your hand and it's so easy to actually trigger. I'm shocked it took this long to actually get a nerf, but I don't think increasing its cost by 1 is actually going to ruin this card permanently. I think people will still try to play it in any style of combo deck. It might just delay the combos for 1 additional turn. I think the better nerf would have also been to include a HP reduce by 1, just so it's easier for your opponent to actually kill with a spell early on in the game without triggering its frenzy. The fourth nerf we're seeing is to Snowfall Guardian, and this is the first card actually from the set to actually see a change, which is a increase to its cost to 6. Similar to the last card, I don't think this will probably see too much of a difference in playability by increasing its cost by 1, though it does help the non-games against free Shaman that you would run into when they just kept copying with Volnir and then freezing your board for quite a few turns. That was always an annoying factor that could actually happen, and I'm glad to see some type of change to that deck. Though, because Shaman has ways to actually discount this card, I don't think they're going to feel this too much, but it should give the possibility of some aggro decks that use a bunch of minions more hope, just because of the fact that you're waiting an additional turn before your opponent starts freezing your entire board as it currently stands. The fifth card getting a nerf is Touch of the Nath Regime, which is reducing its healing that it does by 1. I don't think this is going to change much playability for this card in particular. And to be honest, this is probably the card that is the most playable still after all the nerfs that are being done. It's just a great card to include in questline Warlock as a way to heal your hero up after you do a bunch of damage to your face, and it is a great removal tool. The other Warlock nerf is to ruin Mithril Rod. This shouldn't be that big of a shock. This card was a problem back when it cost 3, and now it costs 5 instead of 4, but I don't think this will kill the card. It turns out the fact that you can discount your entire hand by 1 makes a card pretty impactful unless you make it absurdly high costs. I don't think this is going to actually stop the card from seeing any play. People thought it was dead when it got nerfed the first time, but it turns out it doesn't matter how much you nerf a card like this, it's still probably going to see some play in some type of greedy deck. Warrior is actually getting one of their previous buffs reverted in the form of Blood Cell Deckhand, where they're reducing her HP by 1. This is something that a lot of people have been calling for since the buffs of Questline Warrior, and the fact that we got a bunch of other Questline Warrior support in the mini set. I'm shocked that it took this long to actually nerf the card, but I think they were probably waiting until in the new set. I still think this will probably see some play in Questline Warrior, though I don't know what other pirate you could actually run over this, so it might actually just keep seeing play no matter what. The fact you can reduce the cost of a weapon by 1 makes it powerful no matter what anyways. Depends on which weapon you're actually running in the deck, I guess. Overall, I would say it's a decent nerf. It's nice seeing nerfs that actually don't completely kill a card instead of ones that do completely kill a card, like the one next. The next nerf is to Iron Deep Trog, which makes it summon another Iron Deep Trog now instead of a exact copy. This is a nerf that I'm not shocked to see actually happen. It's something that I completely expected when I saw the card revealed, and the only decks that are going to keep running this is something that generates a bunch of tokens, where this could actually be pretty prevalent. But besides that, I think this actually probably kills the card. I think this card has seen better days, and I'm actually quite grateful that this card is seeing a nerf. It shut out a bunch of early game spell-based decks whenever you saw this on the board, unless you had some way to instantly deal with it. And if your opponent had any way to actually make it harder to kill, then this card turning a game into a non-game, and that's no fun in any form of manner. And for the final nerf, which is to one of my favorite cards currently in Standard, Mogar Artificer. This card should be no surprise of why it's one of my favorite cards. It enables Silas Owtk in so many different decks. And I do understand the problem with this card in particular, though I don't think an increase in its mana by 1 is going to do much for the decks that they're actually trying to target, which is the Owtk Demon Hunter deck and the Owltk, because both decks should still be able to discount the cards in their hand. However, I do think the Owltk is going to be a lot worse off than it currently is, and you can see through these nerfs that that's what they're trying to target most directly, without nerfing some of the new cards in case there should be some interesting other deck that actually can appear through those new cards. While I am personally sad that this is going to get nerfed, I do understand why it needed to be nerfed. Alright, now that we're through some nerfs, let's go over some of the buffs. The first buff is to be Stalker Tavish, which decreases the cost of his hero power by 1. I think this change is pretty good for the card overall. The card's not too oppressive, and it's seen some home in some hunter decks, but it's not included in every single hunter deck, so I think it's probably a good enough change. There are ways still to abuse the hero power anyways through questline Hunter. However, this buff doesn't actually change much with a deck like that anyways, so it's not even worth mentioning in a buff discussion of the card. The second buff that we're seeing is to Grey Sage Parrot, which is reducing its cost by 2 and changing its HP to 5 and its attack to 4. I think this is a pretty good change for big spell mage. I haven't actually played that much of the deck since the set actually came out, but I do think this is a card that was already being included in that type of deck anyways, so I think this will just increase its playability by a bit more, and hopefully it might actually make big spell mage actually a deck. Mage seems to be the target for most of these buffs. In the form of Mage's hero card is getting buffed in 2 ways. It's getting a reduction in costs by 1, and their hero power is also going to baseline do 2 damage instead of 1. This is a pretty good change. I don't think a lot of people are playing this hero card anyways, and while I don't think this change alone will actually make it more playable, I do think the next change will actually make it quite a bit more playable if a hero power mage actually forms around these 2 cards. And the final buff that we're seeing is to Wildfire. This card keeps getting buffed, and it's quite funny to actually see, just because Blizzard seems to be really wanting to push hero power mage. They're making it where it increases the damage of your hero power by 1 for the entire game, even after you change hero powers, which actually increases the playability of the hero card as they don't counteract each other anymore. And I always did think that the hero card was actually going to have its best home in hero power mage anyways, so this is probably a really great change for the deck and might be something that I want to revisit, just because between these 2 buffs you always have a guaranteed access to a Wildfire if you choose to only run Wildfire as your only fire spell, and ways to actually answer some of your opponent's board through some of your other 2 schools of magic that you can get off of Magister Dawngrasp. And before we end out the video, I figured I'd want to talk about the Mercenaries update, where they're making it where all heroic level 30 bounties will automatically include 1 legendary coin chosen from the legendary coins from the bounty rewards. While I don't think this change is going to change much of how I farm my coins, I do think this is a pretty good change overall, as if you didn't have all your characters already leveled up, the best way to farm your coins is through tasks or by doing a low level mission with only that one mercenary in question. And I think that's still probably going to be the best way to level up mercenary skills if they're legendary or if they're not legendary. But I do like that they're actually making some strides in the right direction to make the game a little bit less grindy, and it's an overall good change. Overall, I would say I don't expect many of these nerfs to do much for standard format, and I don't know much about wild, so I can't speak much there. But I do think that the Owltk Owltk might be the deck that actually suffers the most, which is probably the best news that we could actually see, as that seems to be the easiest Owltk deck for most people to actually pull off. Sure, it is kind of sad that we're going to lose some of the other combos that we could do with the Artificer because of these changes, or because of Celestial Alignment, how many different weird wacky druids decks that you could actually have with just that card in particular. I do think it'll overall help the health of the game, and I'm actually looking forward to most of these changes. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bye bye.